The United States of America, the land of the free, the home of the brave, and the global CEO of main character energy for the last 2 centuries. It's a nation built on rebellion, ambition, and the firm belief that any problem can be solved with either democracy, capitalism, or an aircraft carrier parked off your coast. But how exactly did a handful of British colonies go from dumping tea into a harbor to becoming the world's most powerful superpower, shaping the modern world and making sure no matter where you live, you've heard of McDonald's, Marvel movies, and the Super Bowl? This is the entire history of the United States, fellas. Buckle up. Long before anyone spoke English here, millions of indigenous people lived across the continent. Civilizations like the Mississippians, Puebloans, and the Iroquois Confederacy built vast trade networks, thriving cities, and complex political systems without needing an app for that. But then, in 1492, a Genoese sailor named Christopher Columbus showed up, got lost, and somehow still managed to kick off 500 years of European colonization. The Spanish, French, and British all claimed chunks of the continent, bringing diseases, guns, and civilization with them. Indigenous societies were devastated by smallpox, war, and the classic European tradition of taking whatever wasn't nailed down. By the early 1600s, the British had established Jamestown, 1607, and Plymouth, 1620, setting the stage for what would eventually become the United States. For over 150 years, the 13 British colonies grew into thriving settlements. The North focused on commerce and industry, the South on tobacco and cotton plantations, and cities like Boston, New York, and Philadelphia became major trade hubs. Life was relatively peaceful until Britain made the classic mistake of annoying people who owned muskets. After fighting a very expensive war against France, the 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763, Britain decided its American colonies should help pay the bill. Cue a long list of new taxes, the Stamp Act, the Sugar Act, and the Tea Act. Colonists who had zero representation in the British Parliament were understandably furious. Protests broke out, and in 1773, a group of rebels in Boston decided the best way to make a point was by dressing as Native Americans and dumping an entire shipment of British tea into the harbor, which was both a political statement and a tragic waste of perfectly good tea. Britain responded with more crackdowns. The colonies responded with more resistance. Things escalated quickly, and by 1775, the first shots of the American Revolution were fired at Lexington and Concord. The colonies had had enough. On July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was signed, and just like that, the United States was born, at least on paper. Now, they just had to fight the world's most powerful empire to prove it. Declaring independence was one thing, actually achieving it was another. The British Empire had a professional army, the world's most powerful navy, and a whole lot of experience in crushing rebellions. The Americans, they had farmers with muskets, George Washington, and a whole lot of audacity. The early battles were rough. The British captured New York in 1776, forcing Washington to spend a lot of time retreating and wondering how he ended up in this mess. But then came Christmas 1776, when Washington pulled off a surprise attack in Trenton, crossing the icy Delaware River to ambush Hessian soldiers, a rare American victory that boosted morale. In 1777, things took a turn when the Americans won the Battle of Saratoga, a victory so shocking that France decided to join the war just to mess with Britain. Not only that, but Spain and the Netherlands also jumped in, because if there's one thing Europe loved, it was ganging up on Britain. With French ships, Spanish support, and Washington finally figuring out how to actually win battles, the tide turned. In 1781, British General Cornwallis found himself cornered at Yorktown, Virginia, and surrendered. The British were tired, broke, and no longer in the mood to fight a costly war across the ocean. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris officially ended the war. Against all odds, America was free. The problem? Now they had to actually run a country. The newly independent United States was basically a startup with no business plan. The first attempt at government, the Articles of Confederation, was so weak that Congress couldn't even collect taxes, which ironically was what they had fought Britain over in the first place. In 1787, the Founding Fathers decided they needed a do-over and wrote the U.S. Constitution, creating a stronger federal government with a president, Congress, and Supreme Court. George Washington became the first president in 1789, mostly because everyone agreed he was the only guy who wouldn't screw it up. Meanwhile, the U.S. was rapidly expanding. In 1803, President Thomas Jefferson bought Louisiana from France for $15 million, doubling the size of the country in one of history's greatest real estate deals. Meanwhile, Britain and the US fought again in the War of 1812, because Britain just couldn't let go. The war ended in a draw, but the Americans pretended they won, which is all that really mattered. By the 1800s, Americans believed it was their destiny to expand westward. This was great for settlers, terrible for indigenous tribes, and moderately concerning for Mexico. The US acquired Florida, 1819, Texas, 1840, 1845, and the entire Southwest after beating Mexico in the Mexican-American War, 1846 to 1848. California was thrown in, and just a year later, they discovered gold there, 1849, which led to the gold rush and a lot of very dirty, very rich people. Meanwhile, tensions were brewing over slavery. The North was industrializing, while the South depended on enslaved labor for its economy. Every time a new state joined the Union, the question of whether it would allow slavery made things worse. By 1860, things were at a breaking point. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected president, and Southern states saw the writing on the wall. They seceded and formed the Confederate States of America. Lincoln was like, absolutely not, and in 1861, the Civil War began. The war was brutal. More Americans died in the Civil War than in both world wars combined. The South had great generals, but the North had more men, more industry, and a navy that could actually blockade stuff. By 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring enslaved people in the Confederacy free, which didn't immediately free anyone but made sure Britain and France wouldn't help the South. By 1865, the war was over. The South was devastated, Lincoln was assassinated, and America now had to figure out how to put itself back together. After the Civil War, the Reconstruction period, 1865 to 1877, tried to rebuild the South and give rights to formerly enslaved people. But after federal troops left, Southern states immediately introduced segregation laws, and Black Americans faced systematic oppression for another century. Meanwhile, the North was going through an industrial revolution. Steel, railroads, oil, and factories. America was getting rich fast, and a handful of men, Carnegie, Rockefeller, and J.P. Morgan, became so rich they could probably buy small countries. The U.S. also started flexing imperial muscles, grabbing Hawaii, 1898, the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Guam after winning a very short war against Spain, 1898. By 1900, America was wealthy, powerful, and just getting started. America tried staying out of World War I, 1914 to 1918, but then Germany started sinking its ships and sent a stupid telegram trying to get Mexico to attack the US. So, in 1917, America joined the war, helped the Allies win, and then immediately decided it never wanted to do that again. Then came the Great Depression, 1929 to 1939. When the stock market crashed, banks failed, and everyone except a few lucky millionaires suffered, Franklin D. Roosevelt responded with the New Deal, creating government programs and convincing Americans that maybe capitalism needed a bit of regulation. Then, in 1941, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, and the US entered World War II. America outproduced, outgunned, and outspent everyone. By 1945, Nazi Germany and Japan were defeated, and the US had the world's first nuclear weapons, which it promptly used to end the war. After World War II, America and the Soviet Union became rival superpowers in an ideological battle between capitalism and communism. This led to the Cold War, a decades-long arms race, space race, and occasional proxy wars: Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, leaving the US as the world's only superpower. Since the Cold War, the US has remained the dominant global power, but not without its challenges. The quote-unquote war on terror, economic crises, political division, and tech revolutions have defined the modern era. America remains hugely influential, for better or worse, and its culture, politics, and military power continue to shape the world. From a group of rebellious colonies to the biggest superpower in history, the US has had a wild ride. It's a nation of contradictions: freedom and inequality, innovation and controversy, influence and resistance, and most crucially, a shift from tea to diabetes causing diabolical soft drinks. What happens next? Well, that's up to history to decide. If you like the video, then like it. I mean, seriously, like it. Subscribe to the channel for an invitation to drink tea with the Founding Fathers, or else the bald eagle will haunt you alone at midnight.